Hello, my name is Gary Allen. I will be your host for a new video series on YouTube called Old Y City Chronicles, where we will go back in time to learn the history of the Y City capital, Zanesville, Ohio. We will learn the great history of how this Muskingum River Valley was developed, the early explorers, the founders, and all the many things that happened in the development of this great little community called Zanesville, Ohio. I hope you will join me in the next few weeks and follow along. Click and subscribe to this interesting channel and learn about the rich history of Zanesville, Ohio. So the Moravian Church starts up sometime around the 1730s in Czechoslovakia. There's a lot of religious persecution back then, and this small group of believers found a young man who was a count who had 25 acres, and in the process of starting the Moravian Church. His goal is to bring Christianity to America and make new believers out of the native Indians. Sometime around 1750, they send a group over to Georgia, which didn't work out quite the way they wanted because they will not get into any kind of military conflict. The British made them leave Georgia, so they are heading on the East Coast going north. In a few months they find the state of Pennsylvania and start a building project which ends up becoming Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. The Moravians put a lot of money into this settlement when they were getting it started because this is going to be their main headquarters. In 1851, this count who's in charge of the Moravians comes over and starts going to the early tribes in Pennsylvania, New York area, and it doesn't take long before they are doing the work that they have been wanting to do all this time. And they were pretty successful at it too. Made good contact with the natives. They started learning the language, and things were moving quite well. But because of the unrest between the French and all, it's just a matter of time before things break apart. This is where David Eisenberger comes into the story. David has been on the mission field since he was 8 years old. He's a young man of 18. He is on the Ohio-Pennsylvania border, working very hard to accomplish his mission of bringing Christianity to the Indians, and he does quite well. He comes into the Tuscarawas River Valley again, and that is when the complex at Gahaden Hutton. In this 1761 time period, this is when our next guest is going to come into the picture. He's a younger man by the name of John Heckewelder. And Heckewelder is very important, they all are, because record keeping that the Moravian Church wants these men and women to do. It was mandatory that they kept 3 sets of books, one for themselves, one for Bethlehem, and one for Czechoslovakia's office. It's because of these great records and stories that talk about this ministry that we are able to know all the interesting and important facts of what they did and what the state of Ohio looked like back in the day. It brings us to the John Heckewelder story. On April 29th, 1773, he takes a small group of men with 22 canoes, and they head down the Ohio River, and they are going to travel 130 miles. They will take their canoes downriver. They are going to be confronted by many rapids and fast water on their way to Marietta, which they write about this expedition very calm. Many high banks hold the floodwaters in, and they did come across many fords being shallow water on their way up the river. It's when they get to the Duncan Falls Philo area, around the Salt Creek area of Duncan Falls, is when they hit the first set of rapids. This is a serious set of rapids. It was so bad that they had to take the canoes out of the river and walk around nearly a half a mile. They lost a lot of time, their supplies got wet, grain got wet, and all of this needs to be dried before they head back onto the river. When they start back up the river, they go 8 to 9 miles to hit the location of Zanesville. It is because of John Heckewelder's diaries that we know around where the 6th Street and Pennsylvania Railroad Bridge is. He describes the slack water and the rapids in his diary. He also mentions Goose Island, which we'll talk about Goose Island in a couple of videos later. These are some of the major landmarks of the Muskingum River Valley. And most of all, he talks about the Great Falls up by where the Lorena is today. They lost a lot of time in the Zanesville area. They had to pretty much just drag their canoes from the 6th Street area all the way up to the upper falls. That's a good bit of distance. When they're back into the main water of the Muskingum, they head up to the Dresden and eventually at Coshocton head into the Tuscarawas where they will go to their destination. But it's because of these diaries we know all this interesting and important landmark history of our Muskingum River. Not only that, they made it so the Native Indian families of today can learn their language. He wrote a dictionary of how to pronounce the words. I mean, if you looked at these names on the map, I won't even attempt to pronounce them. But now the young Delaware families of today can get to know their own language, which is so special and so wonderful that a dialect has been salvaged because of the great work these guys did. So I will put a link on the page so that you can learn a little bit about the Moravian mission movement. There's more videos on them. I urge you to dig into them. I think that's just an absolutely fantastic video series that the Moravians have put out to teach us and learn. You don't find this stuff in the old history books, and that's one reason why I'm doing this page and web. I'm trying to get information out there that we would never have gotten, and even in our school books. So that's all the time we'll spend on these two fellas. We'll move on to our next fella, who is a very interesting fella in his own right, which is Christopher Gliss. This is a young man who learned all his skills in the woods from his father. He grew up not too far from Daniel Boone, east side of North Carolina, which was right next to Kentucky. It was only about 20 to 30 miles away from Daniel Boone. In the history books, he should be rated right up there with Daniel Boone for the knowledge that he learned from his father. He learned the surveying skills. He learned all his woodsman skills from his father. When he's in his 20s or so, he's hired by the Ohio company, who is stationed near Marietta, Ohio, survey the area of Ohio. They want to know what type of resources are in the state of Ohio. They want to know about the rivers. The more knowledge they have of the state, and Christopher Gliss was the perfect person for this. He starts his journey from Winchester, Virginia, and his destination is an Indian town called Logtown, Pennsylvania, which is some 190 some miles away through the mountains and travels very swift in the woods. He travels 10 to 15 miles, but he starts out in the fall time. For some reason, is very sickly at this time of his life, is not able to go at a steady pace like he wants to, headed towards Cumberland, ends up having to find shelter in a cave or so, and delayed terribly. The winter weather is coming in quickly. It's all he can do to travel kind of distance that he is used to. He's normally a swift person in the woods, and this is not happening. By the time he gets near Logtown, he's desperate to find a place that he can stay for a couple of days and to get back on his feet again. He finds an Indian village which is close to this Logtown, and the Indians are helping him as much as they can. They take him to the sweat tent that they had, and he's there for 3 days and sweats out the sickness that he has, fever, whatever, and by this time he's feeling much better, and he's on his way over towards Ohio, where he can really do the work that he is hired to do. When he gets into the Ohio area, he is following some of the old Indian trails, mostly the Mingo and the Delaware. He's headed over towards the Tuscarawas River Valley, which the Tuscarawas and the Muskingum at one time were considered all at one. And they end up in the area that is known as Coshocton today, at the forks of the Muskingum Tuscarawas area. He's there for a short period of time, but he needs to keep on the trail. And this is when he comes really into the community of down by the Zanesville area. He's down at Dillon Falls, where he finds, which is part of the Mingo Trail, and he finds the salt licks at the Dillon area, which is the Licking River. But he's headed towards what is known as, in those days, Buffalo Swamp, which during the Canal era in the 1800s, 1850s, ends up becoming Buckeye Lake. So he is headed to that area. After he's at the Buffalo Swamp, he heads down to the Hocking River and moves down towards Kentucky area, and he accomplishes everything that he's looking for. They are quite pleased at the Ohio Company of their findings. I understand he found many great finds of bituminous coal and many other minerals, and they were just completely satisfied with the information that he had brought to them. Later, he was hired to be a scout for a young major, who I think by the time he gets finished with this young major, he wonders if this young major is going to make it in the woods. And this young major was. George Washington was very contrary, hard to deal with. And Washington just was a headstrong fella and almost got him ambushed and killed, as he had no idea how to work horses in the wilderness. It wasn't like being on the Virginia plantation, which he was used to. Working in the woods is totally different. You had to know all of the skills of a good woodsman, and thank goodness George Washington did have Christopher Gliss as his scout. It's the only thing that saved him. I will have some links on Christopher Gliss, a very good video series on him. I recommend you watch that video. So I want to thank you for allowing me to share this first video of the story of Zanesville, Ohio in the early Muskingum Valley back in 1750. I hope that you will join me for the next installment in 2 weeks on the Old Wide City Chronicles. We'll see you the next time. Thank you.